I want to begin with a moment of uncomfortable honesty. As I write this on January 8, 2026, something fundamental has shifted in the global order, and most Americans have not yet been told what it truly means. The reports coming from the Black Sea are not merely updates on troop movements or tactical setbacks. They represent the quiet collapse of assumptions that have governed Western foreign policy for more than 3 decades. What has unfolded over the past weeks was not supposed to happen. Ukraine was supposed to hold. Western resolve was supposed to matter. Sanctions were supposed to cripple Russia's war machine. Advanced weapons were supposed to change the battlefield calculus. None of that happened. And the reason why tells us far more about the structural limits of American power than most policymakers are willing to admit. Before we go further, I invite you to subscribe and engage with this channel. The analysis you'll hear today explores forces reshaping the global system. Forces mainstream media often misunderstands or ignores entirely. The fall of Odesa. Let me be clear about what we are witnessing. The effective neutralization of Odesa, Ukraine's primary economic gateway, represents far more than the loss of a single city. It marks the collapse of Ukraine's viability as an independent economic actor, and by extension, the failure of the West's entire strategic framework for containing Russian influence. During my time as Greece's finance minister, I learned firsthand how economic dependency transforms political relationships. When a country loses control over its economic lifelines, whether through debt or, in Ukraine's case, the loss of maritime access, it ceases to be a sovereign actor. It becomes what economists call a managed space. That transformation is rarely reversible. Odesa was never just another port city. It was Ukraine's lung, its connection to global markets, and its pathway to economic independence. Without secure Black Sea access, Ukraine becomes what analysts long feared: a landlocked buffer state dependent on external sponsors for survival. This outcome was mathematically predictable once one understood the structural forces at play. Yet Western strategy was built on the assumption that moral clarity could overcome geography and industrial capacity. The sanctions illusion. When the conflict began, Western forecasts confidently predicted Russian GDP would contract by 15 to 20%. What happened instead? Russia's economy contracted only slightly in 2022 and returned to growth shortly thereafter. Meanwhile, German industrial output declined by nearly 6% as energy prices soared. Russian oil never disappeared from global markets. It simply found new buyers. India increased its imports of Russian crude from virtually zero to over 1.5 million barrels per day. Much of that oil was refined and sold back into European markets at higher prices. This is what I call the boomerang effect of economic warfare. Measures intended to weaken your adversary often end up fragmenting your own alliance system. A strategic misread. The deeper failure was not tactical. It was strategic. Western policymakers misunderstood the nature of the conflict. They treated Ukraine as a blank slate rather than a geopolitical fault line between two security systems. They assumed economic pressure could substitute for geopolitical realism. Most critically, they escalated without defining achievable objectives. When Ukraine's integration into NATO infrastructure became synonymous with controlling the Black Sea coastline, the war crossed from negotiation to existential necessity from Russia's perspective. And when great powers perceive existential threats, they do not calculate costs like economists expect them to. They mobilize everything available for survival. Russia did not need to be morally right to be strategically predictable. Its statecraft has always been shaped by geography, flat terrain, exposed borders, and the desperate need for secure warm water ports. By framing Ukraine's future as a zero-sum choice, NATO eliminated diplomatic off-ramps before the crisis even began. The Minsk agreements, flawed as they were, represented the kind of compromise that could have prevented this outcome. Instead, they were treated as temporary inconveniences. What we see now in Odesa is the delayed consequence of that failure. The limits of American power. For 2 years, the United States deployed its most powerful tools: financial sanctions, advanced weapons, intelligence sharing, alliance coordination, over $100 billion in resources. Yet none of this translated into decisive leverage where it mattered most: on the ground, in contested geography. This reveals something deeply uncomfortable about contemporary American power. It remains unmatched in its ability to project force and impose financial costs, but it struggles to shape outcomes where proximity, industrial depth, and endurance matter more than technological sophistication. Other powers are taking notes. China is watching closely. Taiwan faces vulnerabilities similar to Ukraine: economic isolation without direct invasion. The lessons of Odesa will shape Indo-Pacific strategy for years. The end of economic hegemony. The failure of financial warfare against Russia has accelerated the formation of alternative economic structures. Countries representing over 60% of the world's population refused to join the sanctions regime. Measured by purchasing power parity, the BRICS now account for a larger share of global GDP than the G7. When the United States froze Russian sovereign reserves, it didn't just punish Moscow. It warned every other country that their assets could be seized if their policies conflicted with Washington's preferences. The response has been structural: diversification away from the dollar, local currency trade, alternative payment systems. These changes, once embedded, do not reverse easily. A multipolar world without guardrails. We are entering a multipolar world without the diplomatic mechanisms to manage it safely. Institutions built for American leadership are struggling to adapt to a reality where multiple powers possess veto authority over outcomes vital to their interests. This does not guarantee chaos, but it narrows the margin for error. Miscalculations become more likely. Escalation becomes harder to control. Signals become harder to read. The fall of Odesa marks the moment when 3 decades of Western assumptions collided with structural realities they could not overcome. Geography still matters. Industrial capacity still matters. Proximity and endurance still matter. No amount of financial leverage can replace these fundamentals. The new reality. This is not the end of American power, but it is the end of American monopoly over global outcomes. The future will belong to those who understand that influence must be renewed rather than inherited, that restraint can be strength, and that realism is survival. If this analysis has helped you understand the deeper currents shaping our world, please subscribe and share. We need communities willing to confront uncomfortable truths about power and its limits. The stakes are too high for anything less than honest analysis. Thank you for your attention. Join me in the next video as we explore what comes next in this rapidly changing global order.